With the current presidential debacle, it is clear we are headed toward a political and social revolution in the United States. Our country was founded in 1776 when Pluto, planet of power, tyrants, and empires, was in Capricorn. A 250-year cycle, Pluto will return to that location in 2024, which will be our first Pluto return as a nation. This is the astrological marker of the end of one age and the beginning of another. Most empires' last two Pluto cycles are approximately 250 years. It is clear that unless we change course and solve our grievances and inequities, we will not be graced with another 250 years. The Earth Gaia may not allow it, particularly if the more egregious forms of industrial pollution, overreach, and depletion of resources continue. What is propelling the next American Revolution is the need for a more egalitarian and free society. And where this plays out most clearly is in the economic realm. Pluto in Capricorn represents the worst form of empire building as an outgrowth of unchecked capitalism. It is true that historically humans have experienced even worse forms of repression through slavery and feudalism, but the supposed potential of capitalism has failed to improve the lives of the majority of citizens. Because in essence it is still a form of patriarchy, a rigged pyramid scheme of haves and have-nots. And while we do not have one absolute ruler or king, the banking, military, and corporate plutocrats have seized inordinate amounts of power, wealth, and influence to the detriment of the rest. It is time to reset the clock and the political and economic systems to ensure the fulfillment of our destiny as a free and equal society. Because despite our problems, globally we represent the opportunity to self-actualize and can lead the world to an era of peace and abundance. And it is clear that with enough consciousness, many of our problems could be solved. With an embrace of creative disruption and moves away from destructive death industries like oil, gas, and coal, there would be enough to go around. However, the greed class will either need to be removed or rehabilitated. Unfortunately, there's not much hope for these individuals, as in a free will universe, they have chosen to align themselves with darkness, and they have spiritually and mentally bankrupted themselves and may not be capable of change. Perhaps we can carve out a piece of land in the desert of Israel or send them to Mars and have them resource binge themselves to the death. Our so-called President Trump alluded to our 250-year history marker. Little does he realize that rather than uplifting the country and redirecting it to a fictionalized past, he represents the end of our influence and respect as a nation. We are metaphorically in the year 1771, and we can see that undeservedness and corruption of power are leading to its own annihilation. The old way is dying. Despite superficial propping up by the media and power brokers, we are now in the end stage iteration of the worst of American empire and are experiencing a spiritual blackout of honesty, compassion, and decency to humanity. And just like there were important alignments that led up to the first American Revolution, we are now in the midst of long-wave cycles of dramatic change and spiritual growth. The old must leave or transform for the new to take hold. Going back to the harmonic convergence of 1987, the deconstruction of trust and empire resulting from 9/11, the stock market crash and bailout of 2008, we are now experiencing convulsions to the entrenched economic and power landscape that will either end in full destruction or collapse or major realignment. For the anarchists among us, the idea of a total annihilation of the economic and political model sounds attractive in some way, but without consciousness, power fills a vacuum, and whoever follows could seek to control in a different or similar fashion. Our individual awareness must shift, and the light workers, anyone who is operating from a more compassionate and serving place, are the keys to determining whether we will just have another version of empire or a decentralization of power. The gods of enlightenment, our higher selves, are on our sides, and if we have the courage to release our addictions to power, money, control, fear, and external authority, we will succeed. And from a practical standpoint, it does not seem likely that the proletarian working class will be significantly represented in the revolutionary class. They have been beaten down for so long and have drunk the poisoned rhetoric of discrimination, separatism, blame, and scapegoating. And unless we're looking at the religious left, spiritual fundamentalists only seek to prop up the current power structure of intolerance and separatism. The liberal elite, likewise, will have a very hard time extricating themselves from the passive role of power and money that has encapsulated and softened them. The revolution will rise from the precariat class, which includes the awake underclass, victims of bias and abuse, as well as the educated poor, those of us with college degrees and intellectual or artistic skills, but no opportunities to make a decent living. In the past, cities, while the locations of much poverty and despair, were also the places where revolutions could blossom and grow. Urbanites usually are more tolerant and open-minded and have, by necessity, some kind of community spirit and ethics. Even an empirical place like New York City cannot escape the blending effects of multiculturalism and mixing of classes, whatever is left of them outside of the elites. The so-called resistance states are the actual future of this nation, which, with some upcoming necessary revision and redistribution of resources, and as positive light spreads, changes in policy and civil life will improve the lot of others. Creative disruption from technology, going back to the plow or the printing press, always led to displacement, but if the intention were to create a more egalitarian society, policies could be put in place to adapt to changing economic realities. And just like with our first American Revolution, the ruling class must die, in whatever form it embodies. This, in fact, has been a millennials-old story, going back to pre-Christian times. How much is enough? When are we going to understand that we are all part of the God source, that we all deserve equal representation and consideration? Because despite endless cycles of tyranny and suppression, we have passed a moment of historical regressiveness as the Mayan calendar and human consciousness was reset in 2012. History does not have to repeat itself. The only end times coming up are the end of patriarchy and its subsets of racism, sexism, classism, to name a few. The next stage of our evolution must truly be self-governance and concern for our fellow man, because that requires us to step into our authentic power, integrity, and compassion. We must offer our best selves and skills to the common good because we are all in this together. And really, there are enough woke people on the planet. The majority are younger, the indigos, whereas the rest of us, old hippies, new agers, freedom fighters, social justice warriors, and compassionate grandmothers, make up more than enough to change the tides of history. And even if the numbers weren't there, but they are, fewer people at a higher vibration of love have a greater effect than many people at the lower vibrations of fear and hate. This is a revolution of heart, passion, and intelligence. It is not one of cowardice and destruction. While some level of destabilization is inevitable, it is not the main goal that seems to float in the right-wing hate circles. Spiritual and moral strength are its markings and a desire to create a better world for all, rather than a regressive bunker of survivalism and toxic masculinity. The next revolution will modernize, feminize, and manifest the original seed intention of our Constitution into a functioning egalitarian reality where we are all different but equal and united. Likewise, the Second American Revolution will spark and connect to a global evolution in consciousness. This is the beginning of the end, and as astrology proves, it's about time. I met astrologer Patrice Kamens.